Welcome back to Chapter 7, Lesson C. What about sustainability? Answering that tricky question about future funding. Now, there's a specific reason that I'm saving this section for last. And if you will notice on your Secret Codebreaker cheat sheet, it is listed as one of the key planning questions, but it has that big NA in the middle instead of having a number of its own. And the specific reason is that this question, although it shows up with a fair amount of frequency as part of a request for proposals. In other words, it's a question that funders will ask, not universally. It is not a universal question like the others on our key planning question outline. And it is really very funder specific. In other words, the response to this question is going to really depend on who's asking the question and the context for that particular proposal. So I didn't want to leave you without addressing it. But it's not quite like the other questions in the sense that it's not entirely a question that you can answer ahead of time and then go back and pull from as you're putting together your proposal for Funder A, Funder B, or Funder XYZ. Okay, in a different way, the actual content of your answer is going to depend on your connection with Funder A and the kind of proposal you're submitting to them, the specific nature of your proposal to Funder B, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And yet it's a very tricky question that causes a lot of perplexity, and I want to make sure we take the time to talk about it a little bit. The key planning question: how will your project or service be funded in the future? I like to call this the sustainability question. That's the common language these days. Sometimes it's still called continuation funding. Sometimes it's still called future funding. But sustainability has been the term of choice now for the last several years. And you hear it come up a lot in conversations about grant seeking and about grant making. And I want to talk with you about why funders ask this question. It's a really tricky question. And I have actually gone to grant makers and been curious about why they ask this question and what they really want to know and what kind of answers will really give them what they want, honestly and authentically. Because this is one of those areas where in my experience, as the grant writers, we feel like we don't have anything to bring. We have no real content to bring to this because what the heck? We don't know where the money is going to come from. That's why we're on board as the grant writers, right? It's our job to figure that out, but we don't have a plan necessarily. So there's a tendency to try to buffalo our way through, if you will. Funders used to ask that question. Let's give a little bit of historical context here. I've been doing this work for a long time, as I've mentioned before, and that means that I have had the opportunity to observe trends and changes as the winds blow from different directions around the whole issue of grant seeking and grant making and philanthropy in the nonprofit community as a whole. Way back when, I'm going to say up through maybe the 1980s, which is where I kind of jumped on board here, there was really not much structure to grant making and not much structure to grant seeking as well. And by that I mean funders didn't really have an orientation to looking at clear project plans and making quote-unquote business decisions and how we're going to invest our dollars and what's the kind of change in the community that we want to invest in and what do we expect to see as a result of that investment. That really wasn't part of the conversation at large, and I'm using a very broad brush here, obviously. But outside the government sector, those kinds of questions weren't really coming up for the grant makers. It really tended to be more about, gosh, sure, we like supporting symphonies. We're very much in favor of symphonies. Here's money for your symphony. And less about show us a project plan and give us specific steps that you're going to take to accomplish specific results. Then when funders began to catch that wave that told them, no, we need to be more businesslike about this. We need to expect our grantees to be more businesslike, and they can't expect us to continue to support them when we don't want them relying on our funding from one year to the next year to the next year. We need to be able to see that our funding is not going to fall off a cliff. Basically, if we invest in you now, we want an assurance that investment is going to be well protected by your good planning down the road. So sustainability it's a tricky issue, because what funders want is to feel confident that you're going to protect their investment with good planning. And what they really want to know is they're not going to regret making that investment when the whole organization falls apart, because nobody's been paying attention to the fundraising question. The answers that will give them what they want, honestly and authentically, are the honest and authentic, truthful answers. And oh boy, let's see. The sustainability question is one that keeps coming up from the nonprofit side in terms of talking with the funders and saying, look, guys, if you really want us to be healthy, strong organizations doing good work in the world, there are certain things we want you to do differently in order to allow us to do that. And the sustainability question is one of them. Take the reins off. That's not a question that is necessarily useful for you to know the answer to. We are asking you to be a part of what it takes to do our work right here on the ground. We don't really think it's up to you to watch over us in terms of what happens next. Again, I'm using a very broad brush, and I hope I don't get in trouble for saying this. So what I guess I'm saying is that funders are less clear now about what they need to have in that question, what they need to see in the answer to that question, and why they need to see it than they were when it was all about creating solid business plans for their funding. All right. So what I'm going to share is a few ways of thinking about honest and authentic answers to the question. I don't want you making things up. I don't want you promising things that you have really no intention of fulfilling. And I don't want you creating an obligation to do something that's not right for your organization. So let's not do that. Let's find ways to answer this question honestly and authentically. And here's a few things to think about. We want to do our very best to present a specific plan for securing future funding if the program is to be continued. Maybe it's a one-time thing and there is no need for sustainability funding. All right, so be very clear about that. Maybe you're doing a construction project. In that case, the project is done, the construction is complete. Is there any sustainability? Yeah, as a funder, I'm going to want to know, what are you doing now to make sure that you can cover future maintenance and operating costs? I don't want to invest in a building that you can't afford to maintain and operate. All right, I do see that happen more often than you would think. If we need additional funds, where are those funds going to come from? In other words, what are our primary sources of funding now? And how can we bring those to bear to support the work we're doing for this project moving forward? Is it even appropriate to think about that? Basically, what we want to be doing is showing strong internal support for future funding. Strong internal support for future funding. What we're really saying is what we're asking you to invest in is important to us, and we are committed to supporting it at the deepest level, and we're bringing our own internal resources to bear on that. And if it needs to be continued, we're also bringing our best thinking and our internal resources to bear on that continuation as well. A big element of that is volunteer and match support. Right? Do you remember, let me think about this just a moment, when we talked about budget? I hope we did this when we talked about budget and we were looking at the literacy volunteers of our county budget. In the document, in the master proposal blueprint, you'll see that there's language before the budget presentation That speaks directly to the fact that by investing in training these volunteers now, we're going to get the benefit of their time over the next 6 months. But your investment for that part of the process is going to flow forward because many of those volunteers are going to continue to work with us on training additional adult learners. So the benefit of your investment, the payback for your investment, goes beyond the 6-month project and flows forward into the future. That's a strong internal support for future funding. If you have a hard commitment of funding or support, you should get a letter of commitment from the organization that's providing that and be prepared to submit that or present that as part of your proposal package as well. I have given you on page 159 a checklist and a worksheet that will walk you through the key questions you need to be asking as you're getting ready to answer this question on a proposal. And the first question is, will the program or project need to continue? If it's a one-time dealie, done and gone, say that in the proposal. We're doing a one-time training here. We're doing a one-time event here. We don't need additional funding to continue it. Will the program be able to generate revenues for itself? If it's an ongoing program, maybe there is a way that you can create an internal revenue generating aspect for it. That's a really powerful way to think about future funding. And maybe you're looking for startup dollars from a funder to get that revenue engine moving. Back to the partnership question, are there other organizations that you can collaborate with to share expenses? Maybe they can bring in something more than in-kind or matching resources, in-kind, non-cash resources. Maybe they can actually bring dollars in. And finally, as we said before, if it's a capital grant, if you're going to be building a building or purchasing equipment like a van, for instance, how do we plan to maintain or repair the building or equipment in future years? On the checklist, you also have potential sources of future funding, the major categories, and then inside each of those categories, some examples of the things that fit there. So this is a way that you can go through the checklist when you're responding to this question for funder A, B, or X, Y, Z, and ask yourself, for this project, do any of these potential sources of future funding apply to us? Are we overlooking something? Is there something we hadn't thought about here that shows up on the checklist? There's all program-related income, anything that we're able to generate from inside the program. All the private grant resources, corporate funding, foundation funding, etc. We've got the government grant-making sources, of course, at the federal, the state, the county, the city, the tribal levels, right? We've got everything that has to do with fundraising. And yes, there's overlap between these, but fundraising are special events and ongoing fundraising drives and our annual campaign and individual donor development, all of that great stuff. And then there's a whole category of other stuff. Maybe we have membership income, investment income, endowment income, redirected budget dollars. What does that mean? Well, what happens if we start to take a look at our organizational budget differently and recognize that there are things that we're covering with unrestricted dollars, those precious unrestricted dollars that you can use for anything? Maybe we are using some of those unrestricted dollars to pay for things that it would be pretty easy to get grant dollars to support. And maybe we can think about redirecting. So if we bring your grant dollars in to support this project, that will free up these dollars from something else that we can then use to continue to fund this particular project. Okay, so just a few things to think about that you can bring into how you specifically respond to this question for a specific funder. So people always ask, what kind of language works? Let's start with language that doesn't work. This is the throw the spaghetti on the wall and see if anything sticks. This says maybe they won't look too closely to see that there's no substance here at all. This is how I got a lot of good grades on essay questions. When you throw a lot of language out there and there's really nothing inside it, but you fool somebody. So we're going to see if we can fool the funder. To continue the program operations beyond the current grant closeout date of June 2000X, The project will make every attempt possible to secure funds from other sources, such as revenue sharing funds, anti-recessionary funds, and any other funding source for which this project may qualify. So if you sit there with this and look at it again, it disappears. There's no substance here at all, absolutely nothing. A promise to make every attempt possible to secure funds from any place where we might be qualified to secure funds. A lot of smoke, no substance. Let's try something a little bit different. Here's language that does work. It's a two-part slide. Our research has identified the following prospective private and government sources for continuation funding. And then I'm going to list those prospective private and government sources. Boom, 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 boom. We have already made preliminary contact with each of these funders to assure them that we are eligible for funding under their guidelines and that their project is a good match for their funding priorities. So we've actually taken steps, and that's what we're lining out here. These are the steps that we've already taken to begin to develop future funding for this project. We don't have the future funding in place, but these are the steps that we've taken to move us in that direction. We continue on. Through 2000X, we will continue to deepen our relationships with these funding entities, securing advance commitments where possible. All right, and then here's the promise. Based on this work, within 12 months, we will have in place a comprehensive, detailed plan for securing continuation funding beyond the current grant closeout date. So everything up to that point is the work that we've already done. We've begun our due diligence. We've begun to create the relationships. We're going to continue to deepen those relationships. We're going to secure advance commitments where those are available. And we will have within 12 months a comprehensive, detailed plan. We will know where the dollars are coming from for continuation funding. So it's a plan to plan, but it's a commitment to commit as well. And for a funder, that would work well. For me, that would work very well. And then I would hold my grantee accountable. 12 months, I want to see that comprehensive, detailed plan. And that becomes a benchmark for the project. So that brings us to the end of our conversation about answering that tricky question about sustainability. And I hope this serves you here. Here it was less about giving you a fill-in-the-blanks model and more about giving you some prompts to help you ask the right questions about what is the truth or the reality about sustainability for your, not only your organization, but for your specific project, and even inside the specifics of the proposal that you're putting together for a specific funder. And one absolutely appropriate way of answering this question has to do with continuation funding. If I'm a funder who offers multi-year grants or continuation grants, meaning that once we've completed this round of funding, we're eligible to apply for additional funding, I'm going to want to build that into my sustainability statement, right? I'm going to say, we're going to do our very best to give you a good return on your investment with our initial funding. And if we do, we will look forward to applying for continuation funding from you so you can continue to support this good work in the community. So we're about to turn over to Lesson 7D. So take a break if you need to. Come right back. Lesson 7D is kind of a short one. And we'll get a good wrap up on some of the frameworks that we've been looking at inside this course. And then I'm going to reveal that last power tool for you, the proposal checklist and the review worksheet. Can't wait to see you back. Just a few minutes.